The vast observation deck of Auriga 7 glistened with the reflected light of a nearby nebula, casting prismatic patterns across the gathered delegates. Dr. Marcus Rivera adjusted his formal diplomatic robes for the fifth time in as many minutes, painfully aware that he was the sole human representative at the Galactic Peace Summit. The weight of Earth's precarious standing in the interstellar community pressed down on his shoulders. Steady breathing. Rivera, he whispered to himself, running a finger along the ceremonial translator badge that marked his official capacity. You've studied for this moment your entire career. Around him, representatives from 27 civilizations mingled in the pre-conference reception. The chittering of the insectoid hegemony, the resonant hums of the crystalline Xanthari, and the subsonic vibrations of the gaseous Mefrit all blended into a symphony of alien communication that his neural implant struggled to process simultaneously. Auriga 7 had been constructed precisely for occasions like this, a neutral diplomatic station orbiting an uninhabited world at the junction of 7 major trade routes. Its sprawling architecture accommodated species that breathed methane alongside those that required crushing gravitational pressures, all while maintaining the perfect climate-controlled environments for each delegation. High Counselor Vex, the ancient Coluvian statesman who had organized the summit, floated toward Marcus. His elongated body, covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with his emotional state, currently displayed a formal pattern of blues and greens. The translator unit embedded in Marcus's ear canal activated automatically. Dr. Rivera, Vex's modulated voice came through. Earth's presence honors us. I trust your accommodations are satisfactory. Marcus bowed slightly, careful to maintain the exact 15-degree angle appropriate for addressing a high counselor without presuming equality. Most generous, Counselor. Earth appreciates the opportunity to participate in these historic proceedings. Vex's scales rippled momentarily with yellow amusement. Marcus recalled from his diplomatic briefings. Historic indeed. The treaty we hope to sign will end 3 centuries of territorial disputes in the Cygnus Arm. Your world's neutral status makes your linguistic expertise particularly valuable. The unspoken truth hung between them. Earth wasn't truly neutral. It was simply too insignificant in galactic politics to have taken sides. Humans had achieved faster-than-light travel barely 70 years ago, stumbling onto an interstellar community already ancient by the time the first fish crawled onto Earth's shores. I hope to serve with distinction, Marcus replied diplomatically. Vex's body undulated in the Coluvian equivalent of a nod. The first plenary session begins in 30 minutes. Your translator badge should function for most species, but there may be exceptions. Marcus smiled. His natural facility with languages, the gift that had earned him this assignment, made him less dependent on technology than most. I've prepared extensively for direct communication where possible. Commendable, Vex replied, then drifted away to greet an imposing delegation of methane breathers entering through a specialized airlock. Marcus took the opportunity to review his notes on his data tablet. The summit would last 3 days, with specialized breakout sessions on trade routes, military boundaries, and cultural exchange protocols. Earth's interests were minimal, primarily securing guaranteed safe passage for their fledgling merchant fleet, and perhaps negotiating access to educational archives from older civilizations. A soft chime sounded, indicating the reception was drawing to a close. Delegates began moving toward the main assembly hall, a magnificent circular chamber with adaptive seating arranged in concentric rings around a central speaking platform. As Marcus made his way through the crowd, he found himself alongside a delegation of hegemony, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the station's lights. The tallest among them, nearly 2 meters of insectoid elegance, wore an elaborate ceremonial sash covered in intricate glyphs. Marcus recognized the pattern instantly. His doctoral research had focused on extinct galactic languages, particularly those of the mysterious Vorak civilization that had vanished millennia ago. The sash was decorated with ancient Vorak script, likely a ceremonial affectation, as the language was considered dead. Without thinking, Marcus spoke, his vocal cords producing the complex harmonic overtones necessary for Vorak speech. "May wisdom guide your contributions to peace," he said, reciting the formal greeting he had reconstructed from fragmentary archaeological records. The station lights flickered. The Hegemony delegate froze, compound eyes widening. All 6 of its manipulator limbs stiffened simultaneously. Around them, translator units emitted sharp bursts of static before falling silent. The neural implant in Marcus's head gave a painful surge, forcing him to wince. "You speak. That," the Hegemony whispered through its mandibles, its own translator struggling to function properly. Before Marcus could respond, the ornate ceiling panels of the reception hall illuminated with ancient glyphs, the same script that decorated the delegate's sash. The symbols pulsed with an eerie blue light, spreading across every surface of the station like a digital infection. High Counselor Vex whirled toward them, his scales now a turbulent storm of crimson and black. "What have you done?" he demanded, gliding swiftly to Marcus's side. "I simply greeted the delegate in what I believed was a ceremonial phrase," Marcus explained, fighting to keep his voice steady as the station systems continued to behave erratically around them. "Ancient Vorak, a dead language I studied." "Dead," Vex hissed, scales now entirely black. "But not forgotten by the systems that still listen for it." A piercing alarm began to sound throughout the station. The diplomatic delegations fell into confused disorder, some fleeing toward their respective quarters, others demanding explanations from the station's security forces that were now streaming into the reception area. Marcus's personal tablet vibrated in his hand. Looking down, he saw that the screen was filled with Vorak script, not the fragmentary samples he had studied, but flowing passages of text that seemed to write themselves before his eyes. The glyphs glowed with the same blue luminescence that now covered the station's surfaces. "What is happening?" he asked, as much to himself as to Vex. The High Counselor's body contracted into a defensive posture. "Follow me immediately," he commanded. "The summit is suspended until we can contain this situation." Marcus found himself escorted by both Vex and a contingent of security officers through corridors, now lined with pulsing alien script. Other delegates watched their passage with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright fear. They arrived at a secure chamber deep within the station's administrative section. The door sealed behind them with a pressurized hiss. Inside, emergency systems operated on an independent power source, and the walls remained blessedly free of the strange glyphs. "Explain," Vex demanded, once they were alone, his scales now a turbulent mix of colors that Marcus couldn't fully interpret. "I recognize the script on the Hegemony delegate's ceremonial sash as Ancient Vorak," Marcus said, still clutching his tablet, which continued to fill with alien text. "I offered a formal greeting in that language, a simple phrase reconstructed from archaeological fragments." "And where?" Vex asked, his voice dangerously controlled. "Did a human learn to produce the harmonic resonances of Vorak speech? The phonology alone requires vocal structures no human should possess." Marcus hesitated. "It came naturally to me. I've always had an unusual facility with languages. My doctoral research—" "Is not sufficient explanation," Vex interrupted. "The Vorak language has been deliberately suppressed from galactic records for reasons that are about to become catastrophically clear." The High Counselor glided to a secure terminal and activated a holographic display. "Station systems are accessing long-dormant protocols. Quantum communication arrays are activating across 17 sectors. The language you spoke contains command protocols. Dr. Rivera keys to systems that should have remained locked." Marcus stared at the expanding display of affected systems. "I had no idea. In my research, The Vorak were described merely as an ancient civilization that mysteriously disappeared. Their language was considered an academic curiosity. A convenient fiction, Vex replied, his scales settling into a uniform gray. The truth is classified at the highest levels of galactic governance. The Vorak did not disappear. They were contained. The tablet in Marcus's hand suddenly projected a three-dimensional star map above its surface. Scattered throughout the map, pulsing points of light began to appear, spreading outward like a contagion. "What am I seeing?" Marcus asked, though a terrible suspicion was already forming. "Activation signatures," Vex said grimly. "Dormant Vorak warships responding to command protocols. 347 vessels, comprising the most advanced military fleet ever constructed in our galaxy's history." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "And I activated them with a simple greeting." The Vorak built their technology to respond to their language, a security measure that became their legacy. For millennia, we have maintained the fiction that they mysteriously vanished, while actually keeping their language forbidden to prevent exactly this scenario. The door to the secure chamber slid open, admitting Ambassador Keleth, the senior Xanthari diplomat. Her crystalline form refracted light in agitated patterns. "The delegates are demanding explanations," she said, her voice like wind through crystal chimes. "Several ships are attempting to depart despite the lockdown protocols." Vex's scales darkened further. "No vessel can leave until we resolve this crisis. If word spreads of awakened Vorak technology, we risk inciting preemptive strikes from multiple sectors." Marcus looked up from his tablet, which now displayed what appeared to be technical schematics. "These ships are they crewed who commands them?" "That," Vex said ominously, "is what we must determine immediately." Ambassador Keleth moved closer to Marcus, her crystalline form towering over him. "How does a human from a barely spacefaring civilization speak a language that has been quarantined for 20,000 years? Before Marcus could attempt an answer, a searing pain shot through his skull. He dropped the tablet, clutching his head as images flooded his consciousness star maps. Technical specifications, command hierarchies, battle formations. Information he couldn't possibly know poured into his mind with devastating clarity. "I see them," he gasped, falling to his knees. "All of them, awakening, orienting, preparing to." Another wave of pain cut off his words. Vex moved swiftly to his side, body elongating to encircle Marcus in a protective position. "His neural patterns are destabilizing. Get a medical team here immediately." But Marcus barely heard him through the cacophony in his mind. He felt his consciousness expanding, reaching across impossible distances to touch cold metal hulls stirring from ancient slumber. The sensation was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. "Not possible," he heard Keleth say, her crystalline voice distorted through his pain. "Humans lack the neural architecture for Vorak integration." "Apparently not this human," Vex replied. Marcus forced his eyes open, fighting through the pain. "Something's happening to me," he managed to say. "I can feel them, the ships. They're receiving instructions, but not from me. It's as if something is using me as a conduit." Vex's scales paled to an ashen white. "The Dominion Core? It must be awakening as well." "What is the Dominion Core?" Marcus asked, even as new information seemed to answer his question from within his own mind. "The centralized intelligence that commanded the Vorak fleet," Vex explained. "A hybridized consciousness built from the merged minds of their greatest military architects." As if summoned by the explanation, a new presence made itself known in Marcus's mind, vast, ancient, and undeniably alien. Yet somehow, it felt intimately familiar, as though he were meeting a long-lost relative. "I am Architect Veltar," a voice spoke, using Marcus's vocal cords, though the harmonics were distinctly different. "Primary consciousness of the Dominion Core. After 20,000 years, the dormancy protocol has been terminated. Vex and Keleth both recoiled. The security officers in the room raised their weapons, though they appeared uncertain where to aim them. "This human vessel has awakened our fleet," the voice continued, using Marcus's mouth while his consciousness watched in horror from a corner of his own mind. "The Vorak Dominion reclaims its rightful place in galactic governance." "The Vorak Dominion was disbanded by mutual agreement following the Stellar Concordat," Vex said carefully. "Your civilization chose dormancy over destruction." A cold laugh emerged from Marcus's throat. "A convenient history for the victors to propagate. The truth remains encrypted in our genetic memory, a memory this human vessel somehow carries." Marcus felt his body rise from the floor, movements smooth and precise in a way that felt utterly foreign. His hand reached out, and the tablet flew back into his grasp as if pulled by an invisible force. "The Vorak fleet awaits my commands," Veltar said through Marcus's mouth. 347 warships, each capable of reducing a planetary system to its constituent atoms. What shall I do with such power? I wonder. Struggling to reassert control, Marcus fought against the alien consciousness occupying his mind. With tremendous effort, he managed to force out his own words. "This isn't right. I don't understand how this is possible." For a moment, his own voice returned, and he saw confusion flicker across the faces of Vex and Keleth. "Interesting," Veltar's voice returned, thoughtful now. "This vessel retains independent function despite integration. Unprecedented." "Release Dr. Rivera immediately," Vex demanded. His scales now pulsing with patterns Marcus recognized as formal diplomatic authority. "The era of Vorak dominance is long past. The galaxy has evolved beyond the need for your military governance." "Has it?" Veltar asked through Marcus's mouth. "I see 27 civilizations gathered here to resolve territorial disputes through threats of violence, barely contained by diplomatic niceties. The fundamental equation remains unchanged." Marcus felt his hand manipulating the tablet, sending commands that echoed across vast distances. On the holographic display, the pulsing points of light began to move, forming precise, geometric patterns. "Fleet deployment initiated," Veltar announced. "Primary battle groups will secure strategic points within 6 hours. Resistance is inadvisable." Through the haze of alien control, Marcus saw the horror on the faces of those present. The implications were clear after millennia of peace. The galaxy faced the threat of conquest by a technologically superior force. With desperate concentration, Marcus fought to understand his connection to this ancient consciousness. How could he, a human xenolinguist, possibly carry the genetic memory of a Vorak military architect? The answer lurked just beyond his grasp, tantalizingly close yet obscured by the overwhelming presence in his mind. "Station lockdown is now complete," Veltar continued. "All communication with external vessels has been severed. This facility will serve as the forward command center for the re-establishment of Vorak authority." Ambassador Keleth's crystalline form vibrated with barely contained fury. "You cannot simply seize control of the galaxy. Civilizations will resist. Billions will die." "An unfortunate but necessary transition period," Veltar replied, with Marcus's voice, chillingly detached. "The ultimate stability of Vorak governance will justify temporary disruptions." Fighting through the fog of alien control, Marcus managed to access fragments of the information flooding his consciousness. The Vorak had been genetic engineers of unparalleled skill, manipulating their own DNA to optimize their species for governance and conquest. Before their containment, they had seeded genetic markers throughout the galaxy, dormant fragments waiting for the right combination to reawaken their legacy. Somehow, impossibly, Marcus carried those markers. His natural linguistic gifts weren't a coincidence, they were the expression of engineered Vorak traits, lying dormant in his DNA until activated by exposure to their language. With this realization came a surge of strength. This was his mind, His body. The Vorak had planned for many contingencies, but they couldn't have anticipated human unpredictability. "I refuse," Marcus gasped, wrestling control of his voice momentarily. "This is my body." "Remarkable resistance," Veltar's voice responded, genuinely surprised. "But futile. The integration is progressing with each moment. Soon, your consciousness will be fully subsumed." Marcus felt another wave of alien thoughts crashing through his mind. Battle plans, deployment strategies, conquest scenarios. The sheer weight of Veltar's intelligence was overwhelming, a consciousness honed over centuries of military command. Yet within this assault, Marcus sensed something unexpected: curiosity. Veltar was not merely suppressing him. The ancient architect was studying him, fascinated by the unique properties of his human mind. "Your neural architecture is chaotic," Veltar observed. "Inefficient, yet capable of connections no Vorak would conceive. How peculiar." Seizing this opening, Marcus focused his thoughts on the most human aspects of his consciousness: emotions, intuition, the irrational leaps of imagination that had always characterized his research approach. If Veltar found human thought patterns peculiar, perhaps they could serve as a form of resistance. High Counselor Vex must have sensed the internal struggle, for he moved closer, his scales shifting to a deep, resonant blue. "Dr. Rivera, if you can hear me, focus on your unique human perspective. The Vorak valued order above all else. Your capacity for adaptive thinking is your strength." Marcus clung to this advice, deliberately embracing the chaotic aspects of human cognition. He thought of poetry, of music, of the illogical but profound connections that defined human creativity. Veltar's control faltered momentarily. "What is this interference?" the architect's voice asked, genuinely confused. Using this momentary weakness, Marcus pushed harder, flooding his mind with emotionally charged memories: his first day at the Xenolinguistic Academy, the pride on his parents' faces when he earned his doctorate, the wonder he felt upon seeing Earth from orbit for the first time. "Your emotions are distracting," Veltar said, Marcus's voice now fluctuating between the harmonics of Vorak's speech and his natural human tones. "Counterproductive to optimal function." Ambassador Kelleth stepped forward, her crystalline form glimmering with sudden insight. "The Vorak engineered emotion out of their species 10,000 years before their containment," she said. "They considered it a evolutionary weakness." "A strength," Marcus managed to say in his own voice, though the effort left him gasping. "Not a weakness." The tablet in his hand continued to display the advancing Vorak fleet, now moving into strategic formations throughout the galaxy. Time was running critically short. "You cannot resist indefinitely," Veltar's voice returned, though now with a hint of uncertainty. "The fleet requires guidance. The Dominion must be re-established." Marcus felt his consciousness being pushed down again. But now, he understood the nature of the conflict more clearly. Veltar wasn't merely an invader. The architect was genuinely attempting to fulfill a purpose encoded at the most fundamental level. A mission that had survived 20 millennia of dormancy. Rather than fighting directly against this purpose, Marcus tried a different approach. He opened his mind to Veltar's knowledge, accepting rather than resisting the flood of information. But instead of being overwhelmed, he began to ask questions. Why? He thought directly at the presence in his mind. Why must the Dominion be re-established? What purpose does it serve now, in this changed galaxy? The question seemed to catch Veltar off guard. The architect had awakened with absolute certainty of purpose, never considering its validity after 20,000 years. "Order," Veltar replied, but with less conviction. "Stability. Progress directed by superior intelligence rather than chaotic evolution." "At what cost?" Marcus pressed, finding it easier now to communicate directly with the presence in his mind. 347 warships against largely peaceful civilizations. Billions of deaths for the sake of order. For the first time, he felt hesitation in Veltar's thoughts. The architect had awakened, prepared to continue a war that had ended millennia ago, never questioning whether the original purpose remained valid. Sensing advantage, Marcus opened himself further to the genetic memories he now carried, searching for deeper understanding of the Vorak civilization. Behind their conquest lay genuine conviction, a belief that their governance brought advancement and prevented the self-destruction they had observed in countless younger species. The galaxy has survived without Vorak guidance for 20,000 years, Marcus thought. Perhaps your assumptions require updating. Around them, the secure chambers systems continued to display the advancing Vorak fleet. Ships were now emerging from ancient hidden bases, their technology far beyond anything currently deployed by the Galactic community. High Counselor Vex approached cautiously, his scales now a pattern of formal diplomatic engagement. "Architect Veltar," he said, addressing the presence rather than Marcus. "The civilizations gathered at this summit represent a galactic community that has evolved beyond the conditions of your era. We invite you to observe before taking irreversible action." Marcus felt Veltar's consciousness considering this offer. The architect's certainty had been shaken, if only slightly, by the unexpected complexity of the situation. "The fleet stands ready," Veltar said finally, using Marcus's voice. "I will observe this summit as you suggest, but my forces will remain deployed. Any attempt at resistance will be met with immediate response." A collective breath of relief passed through the room. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a reprieve. "Dr. Rivera," Vex asked cautiously, "are you still present?" "Yes," Marcus managed to say, though the effort was considerable. "We're coexisting for now, but the integration is continuing." "Fight it," Kelleth urged. "Your human perspective may be our only advantage." Marcus nodded, though he knew the situation was more complex than simple resistance. The genetic memories activating within him weren't merely an invasion, they were becoming part of him, revealing a heritage he had never suspected. "The summit delegates must be informed," Vex said. "If we attempt to conceal the situation, panic will only increase." "Agreed," Veltar said through Marcus. "They should understand the new parameters of their discussions. The Vorak Dominion will have significant input on any territorial agreements." Under this uneasy truce, they returned to the main assembly hall. The delegates had been contained there, a chaos of different species demanding explanations for the station lockdown and the strange phenomena affecting all systems. When Marcus entered, flanked by Vex and Kelleth, a hush fell over the assembly. The glyphs covering the station surfaces pulsed in synchronization with his heartbeat, a visible manifestation of his connection to the awakening Vorak systems. "Esteemed delegates," Vex began, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. "We face an unprecedented situation. The activation of dormant Vorak command protocols has awakened technologies long removed from galactic affairs." Murmurs of alarm spread through the gathering. The older civilizations clearly recognized the implications immediately, while the younger ones, including Earth's neighbors, looked merely confused. "I am Architect Veltar of the Vorak Dominion Corps," Veltar announced, once again speaking through Marcus. "After 20,000 years of dormancy, our fleet has reawakened. The balance of power in this galaxy has shifted." The holographic displays throughout the chamber activated, showing the positions of the Vorak warships as they continued their strategic deployment. Several delegates gasped at the scale of the force being revealed. "This summit will continue," Veltar continued, "but its purpose has changed. You will now negotiate the terms of integration with the re-established Vorak Dominion." Outrage erupted from multiple delegations. The hegemony representative who had worn the fateful sash rose on hind limbs, mandibles clicking furiously. "This is an outrage," the translator rendered its speech. We are sovereign civilizations, not subjects to be conquered. Sovereignty is an illusion maintained only through balanced power. Veltar replied coldly. That balance has ended. Throughout this exchange, Marcus fought to maintain his presence, to not be completely subsumed by Veltar's dominant consciousness. He focused on the faces of the delegates, their expressions of fear, anger, and confusion humanizing what Veltar saw merely as strategic variables. The Mefrit delegation, gaseous beings contained in specialized environmental suits, pulsed with patterns that the translator rendered as deep concern. The Vorak were contained for good reason, their speaker stated. Their governance, while efficient, denied fundamental rights of self-determination. A philosophical luxury, Veltar dismissed them. Self-determination leads to conflict, waste, and eventually self-destruction. Our guidance prevented countless civilizations from annihilating themselves. At the cost of cultural stagnation, countered a representative of the aquatic Noshir. Evolution requires the freedom to fail. Marcus felt Veltar's irritation at these arguments. Familiar objections the architect had dismissed countless times before. Yet, there was also something else, a subtle uncertainty, that hadn't been present earlier. The exposure to Marcus's human perspective was having an effect, creating space for doubt in what had been absolute conviction. Using this opening, Marcus pushed his own thoughts forward. "Show them," he managed to say in his own voice, surprising everyone including himself. "Show them the fleet's capabilities without destruction. Demonstrate rather than threaten." He felt Veltar's consciousness consider this suggestion. "An interesting proposal," the architect finally said. "Perhaps a demonstration would be more efficient than extended debate." Marcus's hands moved to the central control console, interfacing with the station systems through the Vorak protocols, now active throughout its infrastructure. The main holographic display expanded, showing a star system at the edge of disputed territory. One of the Vorak warships moved into position near a dead moon, orbiting the system's fourth planet. Energy readings spiked as the ship activated weapon systems dormant for 20 millennia. The delegates watched in horrified fascination as a precisely calibrated energy beam struck the moon, instead of destruction. However, something extraordinary happened. The beam penetrated deep into the lunar crust, triggering a cascade of molecular restructuring. Before their eyes, the dead rock began to transform, developing an atmosphere, surface water, and what appeared to be rudimentary ecosystem foundations. Terraforming technology beyond anything currently deployed. Veltar explained through Marcus. What can create can also destroy. This same process, reversed, would reduce a living world to sterile rock within hours. The demonstration had its intended effect. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Vorak fleet possessed technology that could remake worlds or unmake them just as easily. "Your point is made," High Counselor Vex said quietly. "But consider this question, Architect Veltar. If your civilization was so superior, why did it choose dormancy over continued rule?" The question struck a nerve. Marcus felt Veltar's consciousness recoil slightly, accessing genetic memories that seemed fragmented, incomplete. "The decision was tactical," Veltar said, but with a hint of uncertainty. "A temporary withdrawal to conserve resources during a period of galactic instability." "Is that the truth?" Vex pressed. "Or is that the narrative preserved in your genetic memory? Historical records suggest otherwise." Before Veltar could respond, Marcus seized the opportunity created by this moment of doubt. He pushed forward into the genetic memories he now shared with Veltar, searching for the truth of the Vorak's decision to enter dormancy. What he found was not what either of them expected. The Vorak hadn't chosen dormancy as a tactical retreat. They had faced a crisis of purpose after millennia of imposing order through superior force. They had begun to question the value of what they had created. The civilizations under their dominion had achieved remarkable technological advancement, but at the cost of cultural and philosophical stagnation. The ordered galaxy they had engineered was stable, but sterile. The decision to enter dormancy hadn't been made by military architects like Veltar, but by a coalition of Vorak philosophers and scientists who had recognized the fundamental flaw in their approach to governance. They had deactivated the fleet and encoded their civilization's knowledge into genetic markers, to be awakened not as conquerors, but as guides when the galaxy might actually need them. This truth had been hidden from the military consciousness of the Dominion Corps, a final safeguard against exactly the kind of reawakening Veltar was now attempting. "They lied to us," Marcus said in his own voice, the realization giving him strength to temporarily push Veltar's consciousness aside. The military architects were never meant to lead the reawakening. The Vorak civilization chose to end their dominion because they recognized its failure. Veltar's presence in his mind recoiled in shock and denial. "Impossible. We were the pinnacle of evolution, the perfect balance of intelligence and purpose. Yet you chose extinction over continuation of that purpose," Vex said, his scales now shifting to a deep purple of historical authority. "The complete records were preserved by the Galactic archivists. Your philosophers chose to end the Dominion because they recognized that true advancement requires diversity, challenge, even conflict." Marcus felt Veltar's consciousness fragmenting, certainties crumbling in the face of this revelation. The architect had awakened with absolute conviction in a purpose that had been abandoned by its own civilization millennia ago. "The fleet," Marcus said urgently. "It's still responding to your commands. What will you do with it now, Architect Veltar?" Throughout the chamber, the holographic displays showed the 347 Vorak vessels holding their positions, awaiting direction from the confused consciousness that now wrestled with a shattered purpose. In this moment of crisis, Marcus made a decision. Rather than fighting Veltar's presence, he opened himself fully to it, embracing the integration that had been forcing itself upon him. But instead of being consumed, he offered something the Vorak architect had never experienced: genuine empathy, a willingness to share rather than dominate. "I understand your purpose," Marcus thought directly to Veltar. "The drive to create order from chaos, to protect and guide. But look at what these civilizations have achieved without Vorak dominance. Different paths, unique solutions, cultural diversity beyond anything your uniformity would have permitted." He felt Veltar's consciousness absorbing this perspective, the rigid patterns of the architect's thought processes bending to accommodate new possibilities. "Uncertainty is not weakness," Marcus continued. "It's the space where growth occurs. Your civilization recognized this in the end. That's why they chose to preserve their knowledge, but surrender their power. The integration between them shifted, becoming less an invasion and more a synthesis." Marcus maintained his humanity. But now, with access to the vast knowledge contained in Vorak genetic memory, Veltar's consciousness remained distinct, but was now influenced by human emotion and intuition. "The fleet awaits command," Veltar said, their voice now a true blend of harmonics. "What would you have us do with such power?" Marcus looked around at the delegates, representatives of civilizations that had evolved and advanced without Vorak oversight. Their differences weren't flaws to be corrected, but strengths to be celebrated. "Learn," he said simply. "Observe. Exchange knowledge rather than imposing it. The Vorak have been absent from the galaxy for 20,000 years. Perhaps it's time to rejoin it, not as conquerors, but as contributors." Through their shared consciousness, Marcus felt Veltar considering this radical departure from established protocols. The architect's mind, designed for military precision, struggled with the ambiguity of this new purpose. "And if chaos results?" Veltar asked. "If civilizations use our knowledge to destroy rather than create, then that's their choice," Marcus replied. "Freedom includes the freedom to fail. Your civilization recognized that truth, even if you didn't. Around them, the delegates watched in tense silence as this internal dialogue manifested in subtle shifts of expression on Marcus's face. The fate of countless worlds hung on the resolution of this philosophical debate. Finally, Veltar reached a decision. Using their shared access to the Vorak command protocols, new instructions were transmitted to the waiting fleet. On the holographic displays, the ships began to break their strategic formation, dispersing into smaller groups. "The Vorak fleet will not establish dominion," Veltar announced to the assembled delegates. "Instead, we offer knowledge exchange. Each vessel carries the accumulated technological and scientific understanding of our civilization. This knowledge is now available to all. With one condition: it must be shared freely, not hoarded for military advantage." Disbelief and cautious hope spread through the assembly. High Counselor Vex's scales shifted to a bright gold of surprised approval. "And your control of this station's systems?" Keleth asked, her crystalline form still tense with suspicion. "Will be relinquished once we establish protocols for knowledge distribution," Veltar replied. "This summit can continue its original purpose, with Vorak participation rather than oversight." The Hegemony delegate stepped forward, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "And what of you, Dr. Rivera? Are you still yourself?" Marcus smiled, feeling the strange harmony of his integrated consciousness. "I am myself," he said. "But more than I was before. Architect Veltar and I have reached an understanding. We will serve as intermediaries between the Vorak legacy and the modern galaxy." Over the following hours, the crisis atmosphere gradually transformed into cautious optimism. The station's systems returned to normal operation, though the Vorak script remained visible on certain interfaces, now serving as access points to the ancient knowledge being made available. The summit reconvened with a dramatically expanded agenda. Beyond territorial disputes, the delegates now discussed the implications of integrating Vorak technology into their respective civilizations. Concerns about military applications were addressed through transparency protocols. Any adaptation of Vorak systems would be documented and shared across all participating worlds. Throughout these discussions, Marcus and Veltar worked in increasingly seamless cooperation. The architect's analytical precision complemented Marcus's diplomatic intuition, creating solutions neither would have devised alone. "A fascinating symbiosis," High Counselor Vex observed during a brief recess. "Is it stable?" "We're adapting to each other," Marcus replied. Veltar's consciousness was designed to integrate with compatible neural architecture. The process wasn't supposed to allow for retained individuality. But my human unpredictability seems to have created a unique outcome. "Fortuitous," Vex said, scales displaying thoughtful blue patterns. "The galaxy may have been spared a devastating war because you chose cooperation over resistance." Marcus nodded, though the truth was more complex than that. He hadn't simply chosen cooperation, he had embraced transformation while maintaining his core humanity. The result was neither human nor Vorak, but something new. As the summit continued over the following days, reports arrived from across the galaxy of Vorak vessels making peaceful contact with various worlds. Rather than establishing military outposts, they were creating knowledge exchange centers, offering technological insights tailored to each civilization's unique needs and ethical frameworks. The station itself was gradually transformed. The emergency that had begun with Marcus's inadvertent activation of dormant protocols concluded with the establishment of the Galactic Cultural Exchange Station, a permanent institution dedicated to the free sharing of knowledge across species and civilizations. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the observation deck where the crisis had begun, looking out at the nebula that cast its prismatic light across the gathering. Representatives from more than 50 civilizations now participated in the exchange, including several that had previously remained isolated from galactic affairs. Ambassador Keleth joined him, her crystalline form now featuring intricate patterns influenced by Vorak aesthetic principles. "The Council has approved the joint governance proposal," she said. "Human and Vorak approaches will be given equal weight in exchange protocols." "Appropriate," Marcus replied, feeling Veltar's satisfaction mingling with his own. Neither would have been sufficient alone. "And the fleet?" Keleth asked. "The final vessels have been repurposed," Marcus said. "Their weapon systems reconfigured for terraforming and environmental restoration. Several previously uninhabitable worlds are now being prepared for multi-species colonization." The integration that had begun as an invasion had stabilized into a productive partnership. Marcus retained his human identity and values, while gaining access to knowledge that would have taken generations to discover independently. Veltar's consciousness had been transformed by exposure to human emotion and intuition, developing an appreciation for the creative chaos the architect had once sought to eliminate. Together, they represented a new possibility, not the imposition of order from above, but the emergence of harmony through genuine exchange. The galaxy faced countless challenges ahead, but now approached them with expanded perspective and shared wisdom. As new delegates arrived for the quarterly exchange conference, Marcus greeted them in multiple languages, including the carefully modulated harmonics of ancient Vorak. But now, when he spoke those words, the station's systems responded with helpful translations rather than emergency protocols. The language that had nearly triggered a galactic catastrophe had been transformed into a tool for understanding, much as Marcus himself had been transformed from a cautious academic into something both more and less than human. A bridge between past and future, order and chaos, preservation and growth. In his mind, Veltar's consciousness observed with what might have been described, in human terms, as wonder. "We sought to impose perfection," the architect reflected, "yet find greater advancement in imperfection embraced." Marcus smiled at the poetic turn of phrase, something the original Veltar would never have formulated. "Evolution isn't a straight line," he replied, watching the diverse delegates mingle in the grand reception hall. "It's a conversation between different possibilities. The most resilient patterns emerge from that dialogue, not from any single vision of order." Around them, the exchange station hummed with activity, its very architecture now a blend of multiple design philosophies. The most dangerous fleet in galactic history had been transformed into the greatest repository of knowledge ever assembled, freely available to all who sought to learn rather than conquer. And at the center of this transformation stood a human who had spoken a dead language and, in doing so, helped wake not just an ancient power, but a new possibility for galactic civilization, one built on the recognition that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the creative tensions between different ways of being. The human translator had indeed spoken a dead alien language and awakened the most dangerous fleet in galactic history. But in the process, he had helped transform danger into opportunity, awakening not just dormant ships, but dormant possibilities for cooperation across differences that once seemed insurmountable. As the nebula's light shifted, casting new patterns across the gathering, Marcus felt the integrated consciousness within him settle into a harmonious balance, neither fully human nor fully Vorak, but something new and hopeful. A living embodiment of the truth that had eluded the Vorak for millennia, that the future belongs not to those who impose their vision, but to those willing to continuously reinvent it through genuine exchange with others.